So it's telling the future for the teams. Your executives love it. The finance team loves it because they can forecast payroll, which is usually the biggest expense for any business. And also your team loves it because you can give them set objectives to achieve monthly, quarterly, that justify everyone's performance back to the business.
Welcome to Offer Accepted, the podcast that elevates your recruiting game. I'm your host, Shannon Ogborn. Join us for conversations with talent leaders, executives, and more to uncover the secrets to building and leading successful talent acquisition teams. Gain valuable insights and actionable advice from analyzing cutting-edge metrics to confidently claiming your seat at the table. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of Offer Accepted. I'm Shannon Ogborn, your host, and this episode is brought to you by Ashby, the all-in-one recruiting platform empowering ambitious teams from seed to IPO and beyond. I am super excited for our guest today, JT Haskell. We worked together previously, but he's had incredible experience before and since then. JT actually started as a systems engineer and transitioned to recruiting over 15 years ago. For the last 10 years, he has been the head of TA for high growth tech startups like AirWatch, PinDrop, Zapier, Kraken, and Reddit. So some pretty awesome companies. And these companies have hired hundreds of new team members as fast as possible while raising the talent bar and diversity of the teams, resulting in 3 successful acquisitions. And JT was most recently part of an IPO at Reddit. So much great experience to learn from. JT, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Shannon. It's great to see you.
I'm super stoked about this, but first I would love to just take a step back and have you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to lately professionally.
So I've kind of pivoted over the past couple of years. I've been working on mostly venture-backed high-scale startups for a good 10 years. And as the economy has shifted a bit over the past couple of years, I've worked for more pre-IPO companies. So Kraken being one, and now Reddit, which actually went public, which has been great. Also, just continuing to diversify what we're doing from a tech perspective, automating as much as possible, consolidating as much as possible. And currently I'm doing that for a couple of startups that are about to go to market pretty soon and advising some of the leaders there.
That's amazing. And you just have so much incredible experience. I'm curious, what are the biggest challenges or missed opportunities that you've come across in your time as a TA leader or working with these companies that you're working with now? I've
walked into a lot of situations where I'm essentially either turning around TA or trying to triple or quadruple their hiring capacity. They've hit a good round of funding and now they need to explode in growth. Or it's a turnaround where the team just isn't quite hitting the potential, isn't quite hitting numbers. And I think the missed opportunity there is to find your way to be a great strategic advisor to the executive leadership. And most importantly, the thing I always talk when I'm on board with a company and meet all the executives is I want to be able to predict when we are going to deliver the hiring plan for you. Because that's primarily what they want to know, is when are the people are going to be here to execute the plan and vision that they have. And that's what I've primarily been working on for a lot of these companies as well.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a missed opportunity in that a lot of teams, and this is not always the fault of recruiting or talent teams, that they get sort of handed these plans instead of participating in the plans. So with all of this experience on the challenge with capacity planning and forecasting as a tool for recruiting teams, why is this so important and worth investing in from the company's perspective?
I used to not think it was that important because the high growth companies, it was just hire as fast as you can. And so you really didn't have to go too far in the future. In fact, you usually didn't know quarter to quarter what you're going to be hiring most of the time. However, I would say having done this now and companies pivoting to more backfills, you really don't know what's coming anyway. So to have a way to tell the business, we will hire X amount per month, and thus you will have your team on this date is invaluable. So it's telling the future for the teams. Your executives love it. The finance team loves it because they can forecast payroll, which is usually the biggest expense for any business. And also your team loves it because you can give them set objectives to achieve monthly, quarterly, in order to know that they are doing a great job. They justify everyone's performance back to the business.
I feel like people really sleep on the backfill situation when it comes to capacity planning. It's like, oh, well, we have a team that is staffed for X number of net new roles, but then suddenly you have an attrition problem and you don't have enough people to fill the backfills and the net new roles.
Yes, we're seeing it even more so, I think, in the past 2 years with the movement of talent density, and which has become kind of a way for teams to continue to maintain the health of their teams and manage out low performers. Or not really manage them out, but more let them go with a package and then backfill them. The trouble that I'm seeing in a conversation I've had a lot with other TA leaders in this circumstance is that the percentage is kind of set for what the businesses are going to let go throughout the year in kind of a steady clip. However, the order in which they do it and a plan to backfill quickly isn't always in place. And so a manager will do the right thing is they're told by the business to let that person go. And then they go to TA like, hey, I'm ready to open my rec. The person's leaving in a week. Sorry, we can't open your rec right now. We have a completely full deck in front of us, which then disincentivizes management to make the best decisions for the business. Also, it brings greater burden to the good performers who are still there. They get very frustrated. They end up leaving. The attrition rate exacerbates. So it's really great to be able to forecast out to say, here's how we can digest this process for the business and deliver in the right way on time as expected.
Yeah, the attrition snowball is definitely a snowball you don't want to be a part of if you can avoid it. So that's why the capacity planning is such an important factor when it comes to hiring and recruiting. So getting kind of like more into the weeds here. And for those listening, we're actually going to have a webinar where JT is going to walk through more visually how he does this. But can you walk us through building your capacity model? How do you build your capacity model? Where do you start? And kind of what are the steps that you take?
The more data you have, the easier this is to do it. And the more that you have leveling, like job levels in your business, the easier it is to do it. However, you need neither to do this. You can build this without it. So I'll give you the best example. When I just did this with Reddit, I sat down with my managers and asked them to go through each discipline of role. If all engineering jobs are kind of the same, all product jobs are the same, all security jobs, or whatever, all the divisions that we were supporting. And the question is, how many of those jobs could a average recruiter fill if all that they were working on is that position in a quarter? And so you start every level 1, 2, 3, and just work your way up. And what you'll find is that there's not a linear way that this works. It's like you can continuously just look from one side to the other and multiply by 0.25, and then that's the next level. Typically, you see it doubling. So if 1 and 2s are typically the same, IC3, IC4, or L3, R4 are the same, 5s and 6s, so on and so forth. But the time to fill usually is 50% greater than the prior level in a lot of instances. So when you have that figured out, you can then look at that and assign the differential. So the issue with capacity is not only what the team can do, but the complexity of what they're working on. And how do you quantify that in a forecast? So if you have a lot of director positions, or you're working on a very niche skill like machine learning engineers, which a lot of companies are working on right now, those are incredibly hard to fill right now. How do you quantify the complexity of that role against the capacity of the team? And typically, if you look at time to fill is a good measure of that. And then if you look at how long it takes to fill that role, and then you can add a point value to each level and say maybe a level 1 is a 1, maybe 2 is a 1, 3s are a 3, 4 is a 3. And then as you add that up, you can look at what the average point value of the total amount of recs a recruiter carries and actually is doing a great job on. And that kind of sets the capacity for each recruiter on the team. You can go through and backtest this and look at your last quarter or two and see how many points did you fill with the team, and does this actually equate to what we're looking at now, and adjust along the way. But I think the most important thing to look at is a capacity is, how I define it, is what the team is working on, like a rec load that is completely covered. So if you have 15 recs you're working on, the likelihood of you covering 15 recs end to end in a pipeline is very low, unless you're working on very low level roles. If you're working on high complex roles, maybe 5 or 6 is the capacity, meaning you are driving towards a hiring date. So these roles on average are going to close in 60 days. At 45 days, are you at the final step with a lot of candidates at that point? Yes or no? And that's kind of how you would determine this. So even if you have a reactive recruiting model where you have no idea where you're going to be hiring in a quarter or two, all you have to do is take what you have, plug it into your capacity, and see exactly how much you have available to work on this, and then what you don't. And the tough part about this in implementing is to get leadership to listen to this and to say, here's where we're at, here's what I'm going to deliver for you. And what I've typically done is had a list of all recs and all positions available for the entire company, visible to everyone, to see what do we have open now, when do we expect it to close, and what is coming next, so that the person who is 20th on the list isn't like beating down the door saying, when are you going to my rec? When are you going to my rec? So leadership has decided this order, and this is how we're going to proceed.
Yeah, I do feel like in large scale startups or like larger companies like Reddit, I haven't experienced that from the perspective you have. But even at smaller companies, you know, you get people knocking down your door saying like, I needed to hire this person yesterday. It's like, Okay, well, your counterpart has also needed to hire their person yesterday, and our VP of engineering also needed to hire their person yesterday. And so from the business perspective, if you don't have from the top down, like what are the priorities and what is most important at the high level, it's impossible to go back to the person and say, hey, like this is actually where you're at on the list. So I think it's great that you have that baked in here.
I just talked to a recruiter last week. She is in that position where she is the sole recruiter for the entire company. And she has she has to manage all the executive relationships, plus all the candidates, plus everything else. And how do you balance that? I was actually quite impressed. She's working incredibly efficiently. We actually talked about the rec she has open in the pipeline. But I said, how are you managing this on the back end to set expectations and prioritization? And that's the piece where I think even if you're a one-person show, that you can sit down with your leadership and say, I need your help here. I just want to make sure that I'm working in the order that you want me to work in. And thus that cascades down.
Yeah. Big shout out to the solo recruiters out there.
I've been there.
It's such a tough job. In terms of like how you tangibly get leadership and managers on board, can you walk through a little bit of how you did that over time?
So I'll give you two examples. One, so for instance, at a company where in Q1, I had a team of about 17, and they wanted us to fill 125 positions at Q1, beginning of the year. The trouble with that was there's a lot of directors, a lot of managers, and a lot of very senior level hires to hit first so that they can then hire the rest of their teams. When you looked at the averages of what we had in the prior year, the average job level, I think, was like an IC3 or L3. This year, it was an L4 with a lot heavier lean to the senior level. So what we had, the team, and what they could produce last year was not equivalent to what we could produce this year. And when I actually ran the numbers against the capacity model, met with the entire executive team to tamp down the hiring plan down to 90, brought down some levels of some roles, pushed some roles out to Q2. The team actually filled 110 that quarter, but it definitely wasn't going to be 125, which would have disappointed a lot of folks who really needed these teams in place to execute the rest of the year. So that's one way that it has really worked well for us. So we were able to hire 110, but definitely didn't 125, and really make the executive team happy that we delivered, at least over-delivered on what we said we could, but didn't deliver on what they wanted. But it was a good in-between. For other times when I have worked on this, it has just been a request of good faith in a lot of instances. At a prior company, there was a recruiter solely working on data engineering, data scientists, data analysts, things like that. Had way too many recs open at once. Like this is that 15 plus rec load. Offer acceptance rate was way low. Candidate volumes was way low. Just had too much on their plate to be able to do a good job. So we brought the rec load down to 6. And unless a job was truly a duplicate, we could increase it and add those to it because we could just share the pipeline. In the prior quarter of having 15 recs, she filled 7 to 8. The next quarter of having 6, she filled 13. So it showed that if you actually give your recruiters time to do a great job, focus on their candidates, build relationships, the biggest thing is tackling the challenges and roadblocks that they see with their managers, having the time to do that and fix things that are broken. You really need that. You need that space to be able to do that work. So that also kind of protects that for the recruiter to do their best job and really feel good about what they're doing.
I have a question that might lead to a hot take early. It's sort of like part logistical, part philosophical. When you think about recruiters, and a lot of recruiters I know have the desire to work on projects because that's what keeps their mind fresh. How do you bake that into capacity plans? And should you, I guess?
It's the easiest thing to do when you actually have a capacity. If you have a recruiter who's going to work on a project for the quarter, say the normal rec load is 20 points worth of recs, however that adds up, you bring them down to 15 and just keep them at 15. You might go 16, 17 every once in a while, but not for a sustained time. And ensuring that they're spending the time that they're not working on recs on that project and what they're working on. We did this at Reddit, where we started diversity events and trying to recruit more underrepresented talent into Reddit. And so to give more space and time to those recruiters who are working on these events, we tried to mitigate continuously opening more and more recs for them and just try to keep them at a digestible level so that they weren't totally overwhelmed with this additional work that they were doing. Events is hard. It's a lot of work, and we all knew that, and they did a great job with it. So having that protection to say, here's the capacity for them, it also enables the managers to stand up for their team and say, sorry, so-and-so is at a reduced rate at this point. They're going to wrap up the project next month, and then we'll be able to run back. It's really tough considering the constrained resources for a lot of companies right now to be able to justify this and to say it. But if you can track it in a way as a TA leader that you have the businesses buy in on this, they see the value in what they're doing as well and that it's critical, they will also help protect the capacity for your team member as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that projects are so important for recruiters because if you feel like a cog in wheel, you're not really motivated to do the core role. So those projects that really help you expand your skill set, expand your mind, I think personally lead to a more productive recruiter.
And I've been there. I mean, we've all been there in recruiting where I just don't even want to talk to another one of these candidates again. I have talked to 500 of them and it's the same conversation. I need to go do something else. And if you're running your team this way, you enable people to move around and do other things and expand and grow, which you really need. You want people to continue to develop and expand on what they're doing. So yeah, it's critical to be able to do this for them.
Agreed. Any other important considerations that companies or teams should have when they're thinking about capacity planning and forecasting?
So when I interview TA managers, we run through a very quick example of this and try to work in a very kind of back of the napkin forecast for their team. We give them a little scenario and say, draw up a forecast for me. They prepare this in advance and present it to us. It's not something on the fly. The one place I consistently see TA leaders fail on this is your team takes time off. The whole company takes time off at times. So if you're building your forecast model, no one has a 12-month year ever, unless you're just grinding yourself in extreme conditions. Most people take at least 2 weeks off a year. You're going to be slow over the Thanksgiving holiday in the US. There's other holidays throughout the world where you have to be mindful of that if you have a global team. Around winter holidays, the end of December, same thing, you're going to slow down again. So as you're building your capacity model, I think it's really important to go in, if you have this data saved or available, to see your team and how much time do they actually take off in a year. That's really important that your team bogs their time off so you can capacity plan and be able to forecast that way. The same thing goes for companies do a lot of retreats, offsites, teams are going to conferences. You really have to understand the availability of basically interviewing. That's what you really care about. Who's going to be around to talk to candidates and move pipelines forward and plan in that way. Secondarily, look at trends. And this is what Ashby is so great about, is you can actually look at a lot of dashboards and see what is your interviewing capacity, what is your offer capacity, offer acceptance rates typically throughout the year. Most teams, I would bet, see a slowdown in the summertime. So you should plan to bring down your forecast maybe 10, 15% in the heavy summer months, probably equal to what you're going to see in December as well at the same time. So that's the piece too, just looking to the future and planning for a full calendar year and be able to deliver without having to think, oh shoot, everyone's taking this week off. Right. Nothing's going to happen. Also, pipelines are going to shut down and take 2 weeks to rebuild. So you got to account for that also. That's kind of the challenging part of it. I think the other piece too is, again, going back to the talent density piece, this is a really critical place that you have to be involved in those leadership discussions about the timing for when these happen. And then be able to present data back to the team to say, okay, a staff engineer takes 90 days to fill. A senior engineer takes 60 days to fill. If we are saying goodbye to this person, plan on it taking probably 3 months to do so. If you have a great sourcing team that can work in the future and start pipelining these way in advance, it makes that a lot easier to digest. And in accounting for sourcers, in most of these models, I would typically add 50% of the rec load back to every recruiter for every sourcer that they have on their team. So if you can hand off top of the funnel on a couple of recs to another person, and then you jump in at maybe the on-site stage, that will increase the capacity of that recruiter typically by 50% on average. Sometimes less if you're working on executive level, director level positions. But if you're looking at kind of the IC 2 to 5, you can usually bet on 50% capacity increase with every sourcer that you have on board.
It's such a good point that you make about the planning on the 11-month year instead of a 12-month year. I'm afraid to say that I might have failed the failed the test there. Those are critical things where if companies, especially companies who encourage, or global companies who, for lack of a better word, require a certain amount of time off, like that has a pretty significant impact. And offsites, our offsites in October, we're going to be out for a week. That's a lot of time ramping back up for all roles, but especially recruiting, because that pipeline kind of halts for a little bit until you can get back on the phone and get candidates working through the pipeline. So all super interesting considerations there for sure. Okay, taking like a gigantic step back, because we were like super in the weeds there. At Ashby, we have a hiring excellence framework. We talk a lot about hiring excellence, and I always love to get the take from people. What does hiring excellence mean to you? When you hear hiring excellence, what do you think of?
The hiring excellence for every member of a company is different. hiring managers need to hire really good people in a really effective way in making sure that they're making great objective decisions. Executives, from a hiring perspective, is ensuring that they maintain that bar across the entire organization equally. At the TA level, managers are working in the future. And I think the greatest TA organizations work in the future. And it's really hard to get there, but you can get there. And the thing that I've pressed my teams in the past, all the way down to your one-on-ones or your hiring manager weekly updates, when you're on those calls, kind of anecdotally, how much are you talking about the future compared to the present or past? And that's what's great about Ashby, is that the data can take care of the present. You can talk about the past if you need to, like retros, things like that. But for the most part, you should be talking about the future in driving. And I think great TA teams drive the business in a great way to say, we are going to achieve these numbers at this time. We need to address these roadblocks that we're facing with these roles or these offers or the compensation or whatever it may be. You're constantly pushing and getting ahead of what it is you're working on today so that you can iterate and be better and better in the future. I think the absolute ultimate for a new organization is that you're so good at this that every 6 months or so, every other quarter, maybe, whomever is with that executive, is you sit down and you do a retro on everyone you've hired. And you see, where were we right? How are they evaluating the interview process? How are they actually performing today? And then how many points do you have around that check, around self-evaluations, managerial evaluations, peer evaluations, to say, were we correct? And if we did miss, what do we need to change in the interview process to be better, to see that again? And I think the step ahead of that as well, as companies evolve and grow, who you hired this year may not be who you need to hire next year, is to have that conversation in advance to say, okay, the team is now 50 people. Is the folks you hired when it was just 10 the same folks you need again? Or now you need to expand that out, further mature it, further scale it, and drive it again. Again, that's talking about the future. How much are you talking about the future with your leadership and your teams?
I love that. And I think talking a lot about the future shows the strategic nature of talent teams versus the service provider aspect, and bringing that to hiring managers and executives just puts you in a better position to be more included in the conversation moving forward because your insights are that valuable.
You want to be the second person, at least the second person an executive thinks of when they're like, I'm going to ask for more headcount. And then they should reach out to you to let you know that they're doing it. So you can be ready for it. So if you're not getting those pings, or this person has given their notice and you're not the second person that gets paid to let you know that, then maybe it is an important factor to look into these relationships that you have with the business and how can you foster a better one so that you are as good as they are. And that's the thing I always say, even when I was a recruiter, I would tell my hiring managers, I'm only as good as the information I know. So if anything changes with this rec, I need you to tell me right away, because otherwise we're going to spend a week going down a direction we don't need to go down. So if you can have that relationship with all of your stakeholders, it's even better.
100%. Okay, final question. I feel like after all these years of knowing you, you probably have some good hot takes. What is your recruiting hot take?
What I've been talking about a lot lately, and I'm actually doing right now, the thing that I'm working with these companies on is how to scale them without building a massive TA organization. How to make it scalable to the business, reactive to the business, and be able to build it. And I think there's so many amazing tools right now that are coming out to unburden TA and the things we all hate, which is admin, which is the extra 15 minutes to write that scorecard, writing debrief notes, writing offer justifications, all the outreach, scheduling. I think nearly every aspect of the talent acquisition process has a way to automate it these days. And I think the challenge is to not allow the humanity to fall with that you still feel connected to the business, you still have people, the candidates that you're working with, understand that you really want them there, that you care about them, you want them to do well. But there's ways to do that in an automated way and at scale. I actually think about you in that regard, because when we were hired, you were the coordinator for me, and there was a bunch of travel I had to do. There's a bunch of other things that were going on, and you were on it. Great attitude, like, oh, no problem. I know I was a pain in the butt. I got you, rescheduled you, moved this, moved there. And it was an awesome experience working with you. And truly, like, you were a big reason I went there. It's like, all right, well, everybody I've met is so great. Why not? So you've got to make sure you instill that in your hiring process, even as tooling comes and removes some of the burden work for you, that you're able to do this in a good way.
Totally agree with all of that. And thank you for the kind words. That just made my day. But I think the reality of tools and automation is that the intention is really to help people humanize the parts that need human touch and reduce the friction of things that don't. Like when I was at Hired, I think I still have a little bit of like flashback when I see like a calendar full of like 7 people that you need to slot in and all the different colors. And like now, if I would have had then the tools that are available now for scheduling, especially like the stuff that we use in Ashby and internally through Ashby, I would have probably worked. I was working a lot at that point, like probably 60 hours plus a week. I honestly probably would have worked 20 less hours a week. And that is like a big life changer for people, like more time to decompress, less burnout, because those tasks, they're so nuanced, but they're so tedious, but they're not really high value for a human to do. And so being able to reduce that is just huge. Like I am so happy for the people who are in coordinator, recruiting operations, coordinator type roles now, because they don't have to live. There's other pains that they have to live through, but they don't have to live through that same pain that a lot of us had to even just 10 years ago.
And I think too, candidates enjoy it. Candidates like having kind of this 24/7 capability to reach out, schedule as they need to. And I think the next part of this too are conversation bots that will enter in to talk about the HR questions they may have, team dynamics, product questions, can answer a lot of those for them. That's really the time that sucks up a recruiter's day, that you just like, I need to talk to these folks. I've got to schedule this. I've got to work on this offer. And if you can just hand this off to something else that will do it for you, and then you really focus on the relationships and your not only internal relationships, but external relationships with candidates, it's like a really great experience overall.
I agree. Yes. Good hot take. Good hot take. Well, I think we are coming up on our time here. Where should people go to learn more about you and your work?
I'm on LinkedIn. So I don't do a lot of the socials, but yeah, hit me up if you were into data like I am and want to talk about this stuff more. It's probably the question I get maybe 2 or 3 times a month that I sit down with folks and talk about, proactively manage not only this, but a lot of things in TA side, but I just love it. So happy to chat. Look me up. If you need help scaling your TA team, or in addition to just increasing the capacity and the speed that you're operating, that's what I've been working on lately as well. So happy to help out your business if that's what you're interested in as well. Amazing.
Well, I'm super excited for the more like tactical breakdown webinar that we're going to do. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us on Offer Accepted, JT. I really appreciate you spending time with us.
Thanks, Shannon. It's great to see you again.
This episode was brought to you by Ashby. What an ATS should be. A scalable, all-in-one tool that combines powerful analytics with your ATS, scheduling, sourcing, and CRM. To never miss an episode, subscribe to our newsletter at www.ashbyhq.com/podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.